I've been thinking about death, but more specifically, I've been thinking about how I'll be remembered after mine. Good, bad, not at all. History is full of people with grand legacies, and they've all got a fitting epithet, like the drunkard or the impaler, but there's always one title that has stuck out to me. It's so simple, yet it explains everything. So let's figure it out. How to be great, how to be remembered as great, and, well, whether it's important. We're going to do this by looking at people whose greatness has lasted not only the last 100 years, but the last 500 to 2000. Alexander the Great, Alfred the Great, and Charlemagne. Alexander the Great was born in the 4th century BCE. When he was 20, he became ruler of all of Macedonia. He technically became ruler of Greece as well, since his dad conquered them, but they all revolted, so he had to reconquer all of Greece. And then he just went east, killing and conquering until he reached India, never losing a battle in his entire life. Charlemagne, in his mid-20s, inherited half of what was then Francia, kind of early day France, and ended up growing that and creating the Holy Roman Empire, which lasted 1,000 years. And Alfred, who was born in the 9th century CE, although the actual size of his kingdom and empire didn't change much, he was the person who was first credited with endeavouring after a united England, which was completed by his grandson, Athelstan. But then this leaves us with a question. Do we have to go conquer a bunch of people to be great? Because I don't really think we need a repeat of the British Empire. Well, according to this book, no. See, one thing that Alexander the Great did was burn a bunch of Zoroastrian temples. And because of this, and in all of Persia, he wasn't remembered as the Great. He was remembered as the Accursed. See, no one's very great to the people they killed. And, not to mention in Arden's book, she writes that action can only be judged on the condition of greatness, for it is in his nature to break through the commonly accepted and reach the extraordinary. Now, she attributes this idea to the ancient Greeks. The idea is greatness has nothing to do with who you are, but rather the grandness of your deeds. And it makes sense. These three were kings and conquerors. Of course, they're remembered as great because they had to just rule and conquer better than anyone else. Alex created the biggest empire anyone had ever seen. Charlemagne created the Holy Roman Empire that lasted 1,000 years. And Alfred? Well, Alfred created England. And that means we can be great without all this death and destruction. We just have to do whatever it is we do better than anyone could ever imagine. But all this research has gotten me questioned whether I should want to be remembered. Like, whether it should be a byproduct of how we live, and the search for immortality through fame and glory makes the entire endeavor inherently shallow. Because realistically, it won't matter to me. And that's the thing about legacies. We're not around to experience our own. And Lloyd talks about this a lot. Apparently, our repressed anxiety around death can lead to one of two outcomes: a desire for normalcy or a desire for greatness through things like glory, fame, money. So is this entire section of video just a byproduct of our repressed anxiety around death? And instead we need to all just get off the internet and go unpack that fear? I mean, I would argue that my mental health history suggests that it's life I have the anxiety around, but it's worth thinking about. One idea that does resonate with me a little bit more from this book is this idea of lacking. That in the present we all lack something, we all feel incomplete, so we look to either the past or the future to change that, for comfort. And I mean, Alfred the Great was appalled by the state of education in England at the time, so he spent his entire life trying to rectify that by building schools and translating texts. And Alexander was terrified that his father had left him no glory, so he spent his entire life on a grand military campaign. And Lloyd does argue that one of the four main ways to counteract this feeling is the search for fame, and what is legacy if not post-death fame? Does this mean that our entire search for legacy is just us overcompensating for what we don't have in life, and instead it is greatness that we should focus on? But by focusing on our legacy, we show that we care more about what people think than what we actually do, removing much of the value of our actions, or just caring about how people remember us. Just another way of wondering and focusing on how we'll leave the world after we're gone. And though I do love the aesthetic of melancholy and existentialism, I do prefer a more positive outlook on this, and I can't help but agree with the quotes like,
"Society grows great when old men plant trees, the shade of which they know they will never sit in."
Worrying about how people will remember us can lead us to do real good in the world, and that can't be a bad thing. Not to mention, if we don't think about the future, how can we be focused in the present? I guess the search for fame's sake is inherently shallow, but wanting to become a role model and make the world a better place for those who have yet to come is a good thing. So in our search for legacy, it just shouldn't be for legacy's sake. The entire point of legacy is that it's after our final nap. So does how we meet that end have something to do with it? Does it have to be a movie ending or something glorious death? Well, all of our three great kings died of sickness. Not in some battle, not of some evil, nefarious plot, but they got ill and died, which isn't very glorious. But it might have something to do with the timing. They were all trying to achieve some great goal, but none of them quite made it. Alfred wanted to unite England, but that was done by his grandson. Alex wanted to rule the world, but he never got there. And Charlemagne wanted to expand the Holy Roman Empire. Maybe this is all why we universally love Kurt Cobain, but less so Johnny Rotten. One of them died at the peak of his fame with the promise of so much more great music, and the other one outlived his fame, is now either disliked or kind of hated by a lot of punks. How we are remembered relies less on who we are as a person and more on who we are as a character. Our humanity can ruin our characters in the eyes of others. Is it good for Alexander the Great's legacy that we didn't get to see him grow old and deal with dementia or the collapse of his empire? Is it good that he died before he lost a battle? And regardless of how we are remembered, how do we become remembered? Because I'm sure there's been loads of phenomenal, great people throughout history and we just don't know who they are. I mean, if you ask the poets, it's through art. Longfellow literally talks about dead poets being immortal through their works. And there's that famous saying, if you die twice, the first time when your body dies, the second time when someone speaks your name for the last time. To be remembered, we must be recorded. Alfred had the works of Asser, Charlemagne has the Royal Frankish Annals, and Alex literally plastered his name on cities between Greece and India. And think of the Iliad. The Iliad was written in 800 BCE. That's over 2,500 years ago, yet we still know who Homer and who Achilles is, because the Iliad has survived this entire time. Art is the grantor of immortality, and in the same vein, artists, the creators of immortals. This especially rings true because all three of our great kings only started to be called great after their death, meaning that it's something that other people must bestow on us after our final nap. And to do that, we must be remembered, and to be remembered, we must be recorded. And I know what you're asking, can us, the common people, be remembered as great? Because this entire video has been about kings and conquerors. Well, for maybe the first time in human history, yes. See, back in the day, the only people who could write and read were the aristocracy, the hella rich, or, you know, the servants of the hella rich, at least. We all have the potential for greatness, we know this now, but to be remembered as such is more down to how we're recorded than anything else. But because of things like social media or the internet, the common person, you and me, have the potential to be remembered. Yes, there's a hell of a lot more competition, but just by posting, we can be remembered. And if we do great things and people remember us as great, that is our legacy. It's important to remember, though, that these people, these men, they weren't necessarily good people. Their greatness comes from the novelty of the scale of their achievements, not necessarily their morality. And a lot of the time, I think being a good person is a little bit better than being a great person. It is also important to remember that whether this is important, whether you care about being remembered, it's up to you. A lot of people will argue that just living in the present, not caring about how people will remember you, is a better way to live. But it is also just as valid to care how you want to be remembered.